The rate of addiction amongst pain patients who are treated by doctors is much less than 1%. They do not have serious medical side effects, and so these drugs, which I repeat are our best, strongest pain medications, should be used much more than they are for patients in pain.
The billion-dollar family that sold legalized heroin. Welcome back to the True Story series, where I delve deep into the true stories behind movies and shows. Today, we look at PainKiller. Released in 2023, the show is about Richard Sackler, the president of Purdue Pharma, a billion-dollar conglomerate that distributed Oxycontin and was a major factor in the opioid crisis. The film portrays the profitization of medicine, most notably the addictive opioid oxycodone. It dives into the life of Glenn, a mechanic shop owner that received a recent injury. He battles the pain of surgery with the use of Oxycontin, but how long does it take for the pain to become an addiction? Although the victims in the show aren't historically accurate, they are loosely based on real incidents that have occurred. Or another person, Shannon, a sales rep forced into the life because of circumstance. She battles the moral dilemma of profiting off pain and abuse. The show shines a light on the reality of drug abuse and addiction, with the story of
Cassie,
Patrick,
my son,
my daughter Elizabeth,
my son Matthew Stavron,
our son Riley.
as a precautionary warning. They relied on the drug for years and years because they trusted their doctor.
at the age of 32, he died.
died at 42 years,
He died at age 24.
died because of opiate addiction.
he was addicted to Oxycontin, and he's no longer here with us.
We lost our son Riley at 28 years old.
And we miss it.
We are introduced to Edie Flowers. She is rushing to finish the interview. She has a deep-rooted hate for Richard. Finding out that he sat on the same chair, she forces them to remove it before continuing. It is important to note that Edie Flowers is not a real person. She is meant to represent the real-life investigators as a single person on the show. The Sackler family started from Arthur, his father. He was a doctor that figured out marketing was the future of medicine and pills. He bought drug companies and the biggest drug marketing agency. He became rich using this marketing strategy until one day he drove himself to the hospital, expressing that he had a heart attack. He died in the hospital bed. Arthur made a systematic pharmaceutical company that made millions, but Richard, his nephew, was going to make billions. Now that Arthur had passed, Richard convinced his brothers Mortimer and Raymond to invest in pleasure over pain, their new painkiller. They already had a market in morphine-based painkillers, mostly in MS content. They just needed to tweak the recipe to make oxycodone. From MS content, they took on a type of heroin and added a stronger type releasing coding to it. Morphine had a negative connotation associated with it. With the creation of oxycodone, there was a new way to portray the drug. They ignored all signs of abuse and addiction.
Abuse is going to be a real issue.
Under the care of their physician and with full FDA approval.
Oxycontin was going to be prescribed to people with less symptoms on the pain scale. It was double the dose of morphine.
But we're going to give a lot of people their lives back. We're going to take away a lot of pain.
With the product, they needed to get people to test it out. Using hot college students with dysfunctional families in need of money, they followed them to a conference where they are armed to sell the pain treatment Oxycontin to more suspecting victims. Signing contracts indebted them to sell. Eddie describes it as
selling hope to the most vulnerable people, greed and opium.
When Arthur was marketing drugs, he created an ad with several doctors accrediting the drug as magnificent. The problem was that all the doctors were made up. Eddie takes a doctor that has been over-prescribing Oxycontin around to different pharmacies to see the damage he's doing. In one, they encounter an addict begging for Oxy. He is chased out, but runs back in and hops the counter to try and get some. The brilliance of the marketing scheme was the pharmacist knew about the Oxycontin, the doctor knew, the people in China that were manufacturing the dolls, the sales reps knew about it too, but all of it flew under the radar. It was a Schedule II narcotic, which are described as substances or chemicals defined as drugs with a high potential for abuse, with use potentially leading to severe psychological or physical dependence. In 1987, they were testing the compound with all of the mice living through the procedure. They underwent human trials in Puerto Rico. They tested tested them under patients with cancer. The drug was effective for the first several hours. Patients reportedly had symptoms of withdrawal and asked for more immediately after, but they ran into a problem with the FDA. The small government agency was made to regulate drugs, but Curtis Wright was the only signature that they needed to approve the drug. But he kept on denying the pill because he knew the problem was that the pill consisted of heroin, a really addictive substance.
Heroin in pill form is highly dangerous. It destroys the families and friends.
They tried to appeal to his ego.
You're one of the leading experts in the field. There's not a person here who couldn't learn something from you.
But it failed. They tried again, getting him an article in his favorite newspaper. They then tried a different plan, having an informal relationship with him, where they booked a hotel for him and flew him out. It was never revealed what happened in that hotel room, but after that day, he approved OxyContin, meaning that the FDA had approved the consumption of OxyContin.
The FDA officially said that OxyContin is believed to be safer than anything else like it.
Only 1 year after, Curtis left the FDA to work for Purdue Pharma. Not long after, OxyContin had become the most prescribed narcotic in America, taking Purdue Pharma to new highs in the industry.
It's the fastest growing drug in America.
OxyContin, or Oxy as it's called, is suddenly the rage.
With the continual rise of OxyContin, she had started to investigate the corpses of the passing victims, with 6 pills of 6 milligrams found in a person's stomach. Some had up to 11. Eddie had a brother that was in prison. He served time for dealing drugs, similar to the sale reps selling OxyContin nowadays.
Overdoses.
More and more patients overdosing on OxyContin.
The rise of OxyContin meant the rise of home break-ins, robberies, grand theft auto, and crimes. They all increased since the drug hit the market.
Compton, Los Angeles, 1985, the rise of crack cocaine. It is identical to where we are today.
In most hierarchy pyramids, the top doesn't care about the bottom, and this was true. The people at the bottom were wasting away. Dealers were driving homeless addicts to get prescriptions so they could get a cut. They were selling Oxy like a drug. The local police couldn't deal with it. The only way to stop it was to find a crime that Purdue Pharma had committed. The first attorney to talk about the rising problem of Oxy was J. Mccloskey of Maine. He sent letters to Congress and 5,000 letters to participating practitioners, warning them about the increasing problems of OxyContin.
I believe OxyContin to be the biggest criminal and social threat in
Turn
the
it
state
off.
of Maine.
Purdue had to respond. They focused on the addicts and blamed them for the problem, the consumer rather than the product. They decided to back law enforcement and give them their full support. Cracking down on addicts, they released interviews with medical professionals, blaming addicts for abusing the use of medicine, with Dr. David Haddock, medical professional in head pain relief at Purdue Pharma. Most of the doctors had been upping their dosage of OxyContin till Eddie found Dr. Gregory Fitzgibbons, a doctor that had stuck to his oath and was against the push for higher prescriptions. He only prescribed Oxy to patients with cancer. It is important to note that Dr. Gregory Fitzgibbons isn't a real person. It is loosely based on medical professionals that stuck to the medical and doctor's oath. One notable name is Dr. Art Van Zee, a prominent figure in the fight against the use of OxyContin in high doses and addiction. He went as far as to publish articles with choices for OxyContin and the problem with marketing a volatile drug. He delves into the problems with the increasing number of cash-only treatment clinics. They continue going through the study that determined that opioids are only addictive to less than 1% of patients. It was inaccurate. The landmark study was conducted by Drs. Jick and Porter. It was a survey on the short-term opioid use in a controlled environment, the hospital. This was legal because Curtis Wright proved that it was believed to be safe. Purdue was forced to testify to Congress because of the letters Mccloskey sent. They sent medical, marketing, and legal to testify. On the day of the hearing, they testified that it was part of the health code they followed in the state. They trust the FDA and the doctors. They blame the addict, people in pain that need pleasure. They all need treatments as much as a person in pain does.
People were abusing our drug, which is very safe.
They testified that they didn't know until Mccloskey reported that Oxy was being abused and being crushed and used intravenously. Eddie had found their lie. She had a document of a doctor writing to them before Mccloskey had written to them. With the lie that they found, they served them a subpoena, getting access to all their documents, emails, and letters. They got everything, but most of it was useless. It was used to store them. The investigation team met with Purdue Pharma, with Edie Flowers having having to wait outside to simulate the real meeting. Howard Udell, an executive at Purdue Pharma, meets with the investigative team.
John Brownlee.
Mr. Brownlee.
Rick Mountcastle.
Mr. Mountcastle.
Richard Ramsayer.
They are all based on the real-life characters that brought Purdue to court. In the meeting, Brownlee offers up their condition. The label must be changed to the end-of-life healthcare. Purdue must invest in Virginia communities that were harmed by Oxy, around a $2 billion investment, and a public apology. Udell counter-offers them with a $10 million donation to any charity or choice, and no public apology. Looking into the case, they flagged off 12 victims. Only 2 had oxycodone in their system. 1 died in a car crash, and the other had caffeine in their system. When their plan had failed, they decided to approach differently to reach the people that had been hurt by the company, using cold calls as a major factor. They called employees, handlers, and management. Anyone with a phone and a connection they called. Calling Deborah Marlowe, the assistant of Howard Udell. She quickly declined when she realized they were researching into the case. In the closed board meeting, she would take note of what would be happening. Mortimer wanted them to settle, even if it costed them more than $10 million, but Richard ultimately chose to send out more brochures, advise people not to abuse, and remove the 160 milligram pill from the market.
That's what they called 160s, oxycoffins.
She was immediately harassed by Mortimer for the joke and eventually fired from Purdue for it. The truth behind the situation was that Deborah Marlowe is a real person. However, her name isn't Deborah Marlowe. It is used to allow her to remain anonymous. She joined Purdue in 1979 when she worked as an employee and slowly rose up the ranks. She used Oxy as a pain relief after her car accident. Needing it to work fast, she started snorting them for a faster reaction at work. When it started leading off, her performance dwindled. She was blamed for poor performance and fired for it, when in actuality it was the joke that got her fired. Calling back Eddie, she whistleblows, getting their first real breakthrough. She admits that Howard had research about the abuse. She found out about the street prices, the snorting, and melting down to use to inject into the body with needles. She agreed with them and decided to go on record the next day. The team goes out of town to celebrate the success of OxyContin during a party in Miami for all the sales reps. During this, the investigative team sets up waiting for Deborah to arrive. They waited hours, found out that she was at the urgent care. She was an Oxy addict, taking up to 30 pills a day. She was an unreliable witness. At the party, they invited employees, one of which was Jay, the first attorney to write the 5,000 letters to practicing practitioners. He started working for them and joined their payroll. Meeting with Shannon Shaeffer, an ex-sales rep for Purdue Pharma, she hands over all the details of every email and transaction from day one of her starting, all of the manipulation strategies and marketing strategies. They got the case they needed to give to the DOJ. The sales rep would convince doctors to titrate the prescriptions.
That meant that we wanted the doctors to continuously increase the dosage they were giving their patients.
The DOJ agreed. They wanted to climb up the ranks by getting the lieutenant. They would start by trying to get Friedman, Udell, or Goldenheim. They offered all of them the possibility to cooperate and receive a commuted sentence or get charged fully. There was always a possibility that Richard Sackler would throw them away to save the company, but none of them bit. They stressed behind the scenes about what to do, but they were all forced to go to trial. Mortimer and Raymond wanted to settle a deal, but Richard was against it, saying that they will take their names off schools, museums, and take all their money, even if it takes years or decades.
Do not give them an inch.
They hired the best lawyers money could do, Mary Jo White. She led the prosecution against the Gambino family crime boss John Gotti, Howard Shapiro, general counsel for the FBI, and Rudolph Giuliani. They went to trial with Friedman, Udell, and Goldenheim, but they agreed to a settlement. The night before, Raymond and Mortimer called Rudy. He then called Congress, and they called the White House. The White House called the DOJ, which called John to make a settlement. They all got one count of misdemeanor misbranding. They were let off with a slap on the wrist. The deal meant that Richard was able to double the production without a silver lining. It meant that he was able to profit highly off of this. Part of the deal meant that they needed to bury all of the evidence. Everything was taken away with one phone call. Eddie had given up. She gave everything she knew, wishing them the best of luck before leaving. She returned home, where Sean had just got out of prison. In 2019, as a result of multi-state lawsuits, Purdue Pharma filed for bankruptcy. They agreed to pay $5 billion in settlements.
The Sackler family
family will forfeit ownership of Purdue Pharma.
The Sackler family is believed to be worth over $11 billion. Over 40 people die in the US from opioid prescriptions every single day. Over 300,000 people have died in the past decades from overdoses involving painkillers like OxyContin. No member of the Sackler family has been criminally charged with connections to the OxyContin overdoses. Thank you for watching. Next week I delve into the true story behind the second installment of the Conjuring film franchise.